Thank you for tuning in to the Street Writer, the Word Warrior podcast. My name is Noah, aka Big Mex, and we're working on a series of the abridged history of the brawling games. So when we last left off, it was the early 90s. It was really about the peak of the brawling genre, about 1991, 1992. So we're going to pick up where we left off and talk about some of the best hits to come out that year. There was a steady decline in brawlers from 1992 through the rest of the decade. Most publishers were investing every available resource developing fighting games based on the success of Street Fighter II. The studios that stuck around had to push even harder and try out new formulas to hold the attention of gamers. By this point, Capcom was fully entrenched in both fighting and brawling titles. Having several of the artists and designers behind the Street Fighter franchise helped make sure that their new brawlers would also become hits. Round 1. Capcom started in 1994 with another high-profile license, this time stealing the spotlight from Konami. Alien vs. Predator was inspired by the Dark Horse comic book series, but did not take any particular plot points from it, instead trusting that they could craft a story that was as memorable as the comics or movies that they were based on. The game was also a direct shot at the Aliens game that Konami had released a few years earlier. Alien vs. Predator was designed for 4-player action, but most arcades had scaled back on the deluxe cabinet orders. In most of the arcades that I went to, I rarely saw any of the actual 4-player cabinets. So instead of 4 separate controls, a regular 2-player JAMA cabinet with the option for the players to select one of the 4 characters was more than often not what we actually saw in the arcades. So Capcom relied on the designs from the legendary Bengus, one of my favorite, probably the favorite video game artist of all time, to help sell the game to audiences. He designed 2 predators for the title, a hunter and a warrior. He complemented them with 2 humans, Lieutenant Lynn Kurosawa, a female android, and a cybernetically enhanced Major Dutch Schaefer. Dutch was the character that Arnold Schwarzenegger played in the original Predator movie. The vehicles, weapons, uniforms, and even robots in the game were pulled from the canon of the Aliens and Predator movies. The game capitalized on everything that made the Capcom brawlers great, with the exception of the leveling system from Dungeons & Dragons. It had an intuitive fighting system. Punches and kicks and grapples were all supported. It also had ranged attacks. All of the characters could shoot at aliens and even rival predators with ranged weapons. So that the game would not become dependent on simply gunning away the opponents, there was a built-in meter that tracked the range attacks. Characters had to wait for their weapons to either charge, reload, or cool down when they overheated. The balance between shooting and brawling was very well done. The stages and story in Alien vs. Predator unfolded into a complex narrative with betrayal from corporate and military factions. Similar themes were used in the movies and comics. Even the ending was a perfect setup for a sequel that unfortunately never came. In fact, Capcom went above and beyond when it came to actually tying into this universe with the universes from the films, because the actual timelines, the story that takes place in the Alien vs. Predators game, it works out as to approximately when the timelines would have worked out for the original Alien movie, the original Predator movie, the events that happened in the prequels for Aliens and in the sequels. So everything that happens in the game technically could have still happened in the same universes as the movies. If ever there was a perfect science fiction brawler, then this game might have been it. The only competition it truly had in the arena was also released by Capcom. The same year of AVP, arcades also saw another game called Armored Warriors. It was a very unique take on the brawler, where 25-foot tall robots instead of humans were the ones that did battle. Like AVP, it was designed for a maximum of 4 players. Each robot had its own strengths and weaknesses. To give them personality, the robots were shaped and colored differently, plus the pilots could be seen during the cinema and text exchanges. The game was set on a colonized planet that had the Earth pilots fighting against the natives of Raya and their machines. The gameplay of fighting with a robot as compared to a human were very subtle. The robots could cross the screen quickly on dash attacks, plus they seemed to have weight and mass. As they lumbered around the screen, human characters tended to move lightly in most brawlers. The robots could be upgraded to incorporate weapons into their combat throughout the game. No upgrade was better than the giant frame that the players could attach their robots to. The giant robot only lasted for about 20 seconds before it would have to return to the base. It made the game too easy if players could summon it at a whim. This enormous robot was reminiscent of the classic anime shows like Voltron that inspired the development of this game. By this point, Capcom had wrestled the brawling crown away from Konami, and it didn't look back. In the following years, other studios would release games in the hopes of earning a foothold in the market. Banpresto was one such studio, and in 1995, that was a year that neither Capcom nor Konami had delivered a brawler. It was Banpresto that kept the genre alive. Their biggest title of the year was a sequel actually called Denjin Makai 2. Known as the Guardians just about in every other country than Japan. It was a science fiction brawler with 7 characters to play as, including several species of aliens. Each character had a set of regular and special attacks. The special attacks were often ranged and depended on their own special meter, similar to the Aliens vs Predator gun mechanic. However, players could hold a few buttons and charge up the bar manually to replenish the special strikes. A similar charging mechanic had been used by SNK with their fighting games years earlier. Guardians was a fun brawler, filled with interesting details and locations. These were elements that made the futuristic alien world seem alive. Banpresto's next title for 1995 kept the exotic designs but changed up the gameplay. Oni the Ninja Master, in some places it was called Meta Mach. This was a 2-player fighting adventure, similar to Konami's Monster Maulers from a few years prior. The game had some fun designs and it took players around the world challenging all sorts of giant monsters. The most memorable thing for me, and what I believe to be the biggest contribution from the game, was the use of 3D modeling in the levels and some of the bosses. Everything in the game was sprite-based. However, some of the bosses and level effects were modeled from CGI shapes, lending a certain level of precision with the objects and animations in the game that would have been impossible to do by hand. Many gamers had first seen the use of CGI models as the basis for sprites in 1994 in the games Killer Instinct and Donkey Kong Country. Both were developed by Rare. Banpresto kept the anime-style colors and designs so that they maintained the fluidity of traditional game animation. The seeds for using CGI backgrounds over sprite-based combat were not planted by SNK or Capcom in their Versus games, as many audiences would have you believe. They actually began with Meta Mach. The 3D technology provided by working with polygons was changing the landscape of both arcade and console gaming. The days of sprite-based brawlers were coming to an end. In the next podcast, we're going to take a look at the fantastic send-off that Capcom had and an independent studio gave the genre. I know it was a short one today, but I'd still like to say thank you for tuning in to The Word Warrior, the Street Writer podcast. Again, my name is Noah, aka Big Mix. If you enjoyed this podcast and would like to sponsor me, please visit my Patreon page. You can find me there. I go by Street Writer, and consider donating. Special thank you to everybody that's currently and had donated in the past, and even thank you to the people that are leaving questions and comments on my blog as well as on other sites. I appreciate any and all feedback, and I look forward to seeing you on the next episode.